Miami Beach, a paradise of turquoise waters, neon lights, and endless nights. But beneath the city's glittering facade, one woman's secret life was spiraling out of control. A married woman, her younger lover, and a dangerous cocktail of love, lust, and betrayal. One night, their passion exploded into violence, leaving behind a trail of heartbreak, scandal, and blood. What happens when desire turns deadly? Miami Beach, a place where turquoise waves kiss white sand, where neon lights flicker against palm trees, and where music spills out of clubs until dawn. To the world, Miami Beach is paradise, a playground for the wealthy, a backdrop for romance, and a city that never sleeps. But behind that postcard image lies another Miami, a city of secrets, temptations, and dangerous encounters. In the summer of 2017, one of those secrets erupted into tragedy. The victim? Elena Martinez. She was 38 years old, a Cuban-American woman with striking beauty and a quiet charisma. Friends described her as sophisticated, always immaculately dressed and unfailingly polite. She lived with her husband, Carlos Martinez, a successful financial consultant, in a Coral Gables home valued at over $1 million. Together, they had a young daughter who attended a private school nearby. From the outside, Elena's life looked enviable. She drove a white Lexus SUV, attended charity events, and posted carefully curated photos of sunsets, cocktails, and manicures on Instagram. But beneath that surface, cracks were forming. Carlos, while financially stable and reliable, had grown distant over the years. His focus was on his work, long hours, late-night emails, and constant phone calls. He provided, but he was no longer present. Elena, once swept off her feet by his ambition, now found herself restless. And in that restlessness, she sought something more. Enter David Okoro, a 25-year-old Nigerian immigrant. He had arrived in the United States just 2 years earlier, carrying dreams of success and opportunity. His life in Miami was far from glamorous. He worked multiple jobs: barback at a South Beach nightclub, delivery driver during the day, while attending community college courses in business. Friends remembered David as charismatic but guarded. He had the kind of confidence that drew people in, paired with the vulnerability of someone who was still searching for his place. He lived in a modest apartment off Biscayne Boulevard, often sending money back home to support family in Nigeria. By chance, their worlds collided at an art gallery opening on Collins Avenue. Elena was there with friends. David was working the event, refilling champagne glasses and guiding guests through the exhibits. Their first interaction was simple: a smile, a compliment, a glass of champagne. But for Elena, it was more than that. She hadn't felt that spark in years. Within weeks, what started as casual encounters evolved into something far more dangerous. They exchanged numbers. Texts became calls. Calls became clandestine meetings. Eventually, David rented a small apartment near Miami Beach that became their hideaway, a secret world where Elena could escape her structured life. The relationship was intoxicating. Elena described to a friend that she felt alive again, like she was 20 years old, reckless, passionate, desired. David, on the other hand, believed he had found love, stability, and maybe even a future. But the foundation of their relationship was built on lies and contradictions. Elena was never truly free. She was still married, still tied to her family, still bound to the image of the perfect wife and mother. For her, David was excitement. For David, Elena was everything. That imbalance would prove deadly. By early 2017, the affair was in full swing. Neighbors near David's apartment sometimes saw Elena slipping in late at night, wearing sunglasses and scarves even in the Miami heat, trying to avoid recognition. Security footage later showed her arriving in her Lexus, parking blocks away and walking discreetly to the apartment. But the secrecy came at a cost. Carlos began to notice changes in Elena's behavior. She was distracted, often out late. her phone glued to her hand. Their once frequent family dinners dwindled. Their daughter, only 10 years old at the time, asked, "Why did Mommy always have to leave?" Carlos confronted her, gently at first, then with growing suspicion. Elena brushed it off. She was busy, stressed, needed space. But Carlos wasn't wrong. His wife was leading a double life. By the spring of 2017, David's demands grew. He wanted Elena to leave Carlos. He wanted her to commit fully to him. Elena, torn between desire and duty, hesitated. And that hesitation lit a fuse. Those closest to Elena would later recall subtle changes in her demeanor. She became nervous, jumpy, easily agitated. She confided in a close friend that David was intense and sometimes too demanding. But still, she kept going back. Because that's the dangerous thing about passion. Once it takes hold, it's not easily controlled. The Miami Beach Police Department would later describe the case as one of the most tragic examples of a crime of passion they'd ever seen. Not a calculated murder, not a premeditated act of greed, but a violent explosion of emotion. Love, jealousy, desperation that ended in blood. This was not just a crime scene. It was the collapse of two lives, and the ripple effect would shatter everyone around them. But before police uncovered the truth, Elena and David's relationship spiraled further into obsession. And what happened inside that Miami Beach apartment on one humid July night would leave investigators and an entire city in shock.
Every love story has a beginning. For Elena Martinez and David Okoro, that beginning was almost cinematic. It was late February 2017, and Miami Beach was alive with the hum of Art Basel's satellite shows. Elena, dressed in a sleek red dress that revealed just enough to draw attention, attended an art gallery opening on Collins Avenue with two friends. She was radiant but restless, sipping champagne while her companions gossiped about upcoming charity events. David was working the floor that night. Tall, lean, and strikingly handsome, he stood out even in the sea of wealthy patrons and artists. His task was simple: refill glasses, guide guests, answer questions about the exhibit. But when he offered Elena a drink, their eyes lingered a moment too long. David, softly, with a smile, "Careful, this one's stronger than it looks." Elena, teasing, "I think I can handle it." That moment, fleeting as it was, lodged itself in Elena's mind. For the rest of the evening, she found her eyes wandering back to the young waiter. His quiet confidence, the way he carried himself, the faint trace of an accent she couldn't quite place. It was intoxicating. 2 days later, by coincidence, or perhaps fate, Elena saw David again at a small cafe near Lincoln Road. He was sitting with a notebook and laptop, papers scattered around. She stopped. He looked up. Recognition. A smile. That day, they exchanged numbers, and that was the beginning of something neither of them fully understood. At first, their relationship was playful, even innocent. Texts late at night, emojis, inside jokes. Elena told herself it was harmless. She was just enjoying attention. She had been married for nearly 15 years, and though Carlos provided stability and security, the spark had faded long ago. She was tired of being the wife, tired of dinners where the only sound was Carlos scrolling on his phone. David, on the other hand, saw Elena as a dream. She was older, elegant, someone who moved through Miami's high society circles with ease. He was drawn not just to her beauty, but to the world she represented. In her, he found validation, proof that he could belong in this city of excess. Their first real date was at a rooftop lounge overlooking Biscayne Bay. Elena wore a silk blouse, her hair loose, her perfume subtle but intoxicating. David remembered every detail. They laughed, they drank, they danced. By the end of the night, Elena was in his arms. From then on, their meetings escalated quickly. David rented a small apartment not far from Miami Beach, a place that would become their sanctuary. Inside those four walls, Elena shed her roles: wife, mother, socialite, and became simply a woman again. Passionate, desired, free. But that freedom came with chains. Carlos began noticing changes. Elena was distracted, her phone always buzzing. She left home more often, always with vague excuses. He confronted her one night. Carlos, sternly, "Are you seeing someone?" Elena, calmly, almost dismissively, "Don't be ridiculous, Carlos. I'm not a teenager sneaking around." Carlos didn't press further, but the seed of suspicion was planted. Meanwhile, David's feelings deepened. What began as an affair became for him a consuming love. He spoke of a future together, of moving in, of traveling, of marriage. But Elena hesitated. She had a child, a reputation, a life that, for all its cracks, she wasn't ready to abandon. This imbalance, David wanting more, Elena holding back, became the fault line in their relationship. By May 2017, their arguments grew more frequent. David accused Elena of stringing him along. Elena accused David of being too demanding. David, angry, "You can't keep running back to him after every night with me. I'm not your distraction." Elena, defensive, "You knew this was. I can't just walk away from my life." Their passion, once intoxicating, began to twist into obsession. Elena found herself nervous, checking over her shoulder whenever she went out with friends. David grew possessive, calling her late at night, furious if she didn't answer. Neighbors at the Miami Beach apartment later recalled heated arguments, thuds against walls, Elena leaving in tears. Yet despite the turbulence, neither could walk away. Elena was addicted to the thrill, to the feeling of being alive. David was consumed by the idea of Elena, convinced she was the answer to his loneliness and the promise of his new life in America. It was a volatile cocktail, her need for escape, his need for permanence. Psychologists later studying the case described their relationship as a textbook example of dysfunctional attachment. Elena was an avoidant, seeking closeness, but retreating when it threatened her stability. David was anxious, clinging desperately to the relationship, terrified of abandonment. Together, they created a cycle of desire, conflict, and reconciliation that only grew more intense over time. Each fight was followed by a passionate reconciliation, each reconciliation by another fight. The highs grew higher, the lows grew lower. Friends began noticing. Elena's best friend, Sophia, recalled a lunch where Elena admitted she was in too deep. She described David as passionate but unpredictable, sometimes tender, other times frightening. Sophia, recollection. She told me she couldn't let him go, that he made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. But I could see in her eyes she was scared too. David, meanwhile, confided in a coworker at the nightclub that he was done being a secret. He spoke of ultimatums, of making Elena choose once and for all. By June, the pressure was unbearable. Elena considered ending things, but every time she tried, David pulled her back in. Elena, in text, recreated, "I can't do this anymore." David, reply, "Then why do you keep coming back?" That cycle of leaving and returning, of threats and reconciliation, was the final spiral. And so when July arrived, the stage was set. Elena, torn between two worlds. David, desperate and unrelenting. Carlos, suspicious, but unaware of the storm brewing just beyond his sight. 3 lives, 1 affair, and a city about to be shaken.
July 12, 2017. It was the kind of Miami night where the air itself felt heavy, thick with salt and heat. Palm fronds swayed in the sticky breeze, and the neon glow of Ocean Drive lit the streets like a carnival. Tourists stumbled from bars, music thumped from car stereos, and somewhere in the city, Elena Martinez was on her way to a secret meeting she should never have kept. She parked her white Lexus SUV 2 blocks from the small apartment David had been renting. It was a trick she'd perfected, never parking too close, always walking the rest of the way in heels that clicked against the pavement. Sunglasses, even at night, shielded her face. Anyone watching might have thought she was simply another glamorous Miami woman headed to a late-night rendezvous. But Elena was walking into danger. Inside the apartment, David paced restlessly. He'd been drinking, not enough to lose control, but enough to fuel the storm already brewing inside him. Empty beer bottles sat on the counter. His phone buzzed with a message. Elena, text. Here, walking up now. He inhaled sharply, a mix of longing and rage rising in his chest. Tonight he had decided she needed to choose. When Elena entered, she immediately felt the tension. The apartment smelled faintly of alcohol. The lights were dim, and David stood by the window, his jaw tight, his arms crossed. Elena, softly, uneasy. David, what's wrong? David, snapping. What's wrong? Everything's wrong. You keep playing me, Elena. You come here, you kiss me, you tell me you love me, then you go back to him, to your husband, to your perfect life. Elena set down her purse, her hands trembling. She tried to steady her voice. Elena, we've talked about this. I can't just walk away. I have a child, David. I have responsibilities. David, shouting now, you don't get it. I left everything for you. I gave you everything I had, and you treat me like a secret, like I don't matter. The argument escalated quickly. Neighbors would later testify to hearing shouting, furniture scraping, something heavy slamming against a wall. Elena tried to calm him, her voice breaking. Elena, I never asked you to give up anything. I never promised I would leave him. You knew what this was. David, cutting her off. Don't say that. Don't you dare say that. The tension reached a breaking point. David stepped toward her, his voice trembling, his body rigid. David, if I can't have you, Elena, then no one will. Those words, chilling in hindsight, marked the moment passion tipped into violence. The struggle that followed was fast, chaotic, and brutal. A lamp crashed to the floor, a glass shattered, a woman screamed, her voice echoing down the hallway. David, in a blind rage, struck her. Once, twice. She fell against the coffee table, the impact sharp, sickening. There was silence, then a gasp, then nothing. David froze, staring at Elena lying motionless on the floor. His chest heaved, his hands shook. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in. He knelt down, shaking her shoulders, whispering desperately, David, Elena, wake up, please, please. But Elena's eyes never opened again. For a few minutes, David sat in shock. His mind raced. Should he call 911? Should he try to explain? Should he run? The silence of the apartment pressed in around him, broken only by the faint thump of bass from a nearby club drifting through the walls. Finally, panic took over. He grabbed his phone, wiped his face, and stumbled toward the door. Surveillance footage later captured him leaving the building at 11:42 p.m., his figure blurred, his pace hurried. Behind him, the apartment was a crime scene. Bloodstains on the carpet, a shattered glass on the floor, a woman's body lying still. Hours later, when Elena failed to return home, Carlos Martinez grew worried. He called her phone. No answer. He sent messages. No response. By morning, his worry had turned into fear. He contacted the Miami Beach Police Department and reported her missing. Detectives began tracing her movements. They checked traffic cameras. They pinged her phone. Within hours, they tracked the signal to the Miami Beach apartment. When officers entered, they found the apartment in disarray, overturned furniture, signs of struggle, and on the floor, Elena Martinez. The scene was clear. This was no accident. Neighbors recalled the fight. Neighbor, testimony. It was loud. I heard a woman screaming. I almost called the police, but then it went quiet. Too quiet. The medical examiner would later confirm the cause of death: blunt force trauma to the head, a violent, sudden act. The pieces were coming together quickly. Phone records showed Elena had been in constant communication with David. Surveillance cameras placed her at the building, and the footage of David leaving shortly after the estimated time of death sealed the narrative. But at that moment, the only thing the city knew was this: Elena Martinez, a respected wife and mother, was dead. And her death wasn't just a tragedy. It was the eruption of a secret life few knew existed. Psychologists later analyzing the case noted that crimes of passion often unfold in this exact way: sudden, explosive, and irreversible. The killer is not always a career criminal. Often they are people with no violent past, caught in the storm of overwhelming emotion. In David's case, the cocktail of jealousy, insecurity, and desperation boiled over in a single night. He didn't plan to kill Elena, but when his fantasy of a life with her collided with her refusal to leave her marriage, rage consumed him. And that rage left one woman dead, one family shattered, and one man on the run. By the time the sun rose over Miami Beach, detectives were already piecing together the truth, and what they uncovered in the days that followed would reveal just how deep the deception and the obsession went.
The morning of July 13th, 2017, the Miami sun rose hot and merciless, baking the streets in golden light. For most people, it was just another summer day in paradise. But for Carlos Martinez, it began with dread. When Elena didn't come home the night before, Carlos tried to reassure himself. Maybe she had stayed with a friend. Maybe she'd had too much to drink at an event. Maybe her phone had died. But as the hours passed, silence grew heavier. By 6 a.m., Carlos had called her phone a dozen times. By 8 a.m., he knew something was terribly wrong. He called the police. When officers from the Miami Beach Police Department arrived at the Martinez home, Carlos looked haggard, pacing, clutching his phone like it was a lifeline. She never does this. She would never disappear like this. Not without telling me. Not without checking on our daughter. The officers began the standard missing person procedure. They asked about Elena's routine, her last known whereabouts, whether she had any enemies, whether she had been acting strangely. Carlos described her as distracted in recent weeks, but insisted she wasn't the kind of woman to abandon her family. The officers logged the report, but something about Carlos's urgency struck them. Elena wasn't a runaway teenager. She was a 38-year-old wife and mother with deep community ties. If she wasn't home, something was wrong. Detectives began working Elena's phone records. Her last known signal pinged near a small apartment building just blocks from Miami Beach. When officers went to the address, the landlord confirmed the unit was rented under the name David Okoro. That was their first break. By 11 a.m., officers knocked on the apartment door. No answer. With probable cause mounting, they gained entry. Inside, the scene was unmistakable. A glass lay shattered on the floor. A lamp was overturned. A dark stain marred the carpet. And near the center of the room,
Elena Martinez lay lifeless. The officers froze. They had just shifted from a missing person case to a homicide investigation. Detective Rosa Delgado, one of the first on scene, later described it as textbook chaos. Signs of struggle were everywhere. The medical examiner confirmed what the detectives already suspected. Elena had suffered blunt force trauma to the head. She had fought. She had screamed, but she had not survived. Neighbors were questioned immediately. Several reported hearing raised voices the night before. One described shouting, then a thud, then silence. Another said they had seen a tall man leave the building quickly around 11:40 p.m. Detectives pulled security camera footage from the surrounding area. On grainy black and white film, they saw Elena arriving shortly after 10:30, walking toward the apartment in heels. Just over an hour later, the same cameras captured a tall male figure leaving in haste. The face wasn't perfectly clear, but the build and gait matched one man, David Okoro. They then turned to Elena's phone records. What they found painted a damning picture. Hundreds of calls and text messages between Elena and David in the weeks leading up to her death. Flirty exchanges, plans to meet, arguments, reconciliations. The last message Elena sent to David was at 11:35 p.m. "We can't do this anymore." 5 minutes later, her phone went dark. Detectives moved fast. Within 48 hours, they tracked David to a friend's apartment in Little Havana, where he had been laying low. He didn't resist arrest. In the interrogation room, David initially denied everything. "I don't know what you're talking about. I wasn't with her. I was at home that night." Detectives pressed him with the footage, the phone records, the witness accounts. David's story began to fray. Detective Delgado, in the interrogation transcript, "We have you on video leaving the apartment. We have her messages to you that night. You expect us to believe this was all a coincidence?" David broke down. "I loved her. She was my whole life. I didn't mean for this to happen. We fought. She said she would never leave him. I lost control. I lost control." That was all the detectives needed. News spread quickly. Local headlines blared, "Wife, mother found dead in Miami Beach apartment." Elena's friends were stunned. The picture-perfect woman they knew had been living a double life. Carlos, devastated, struggled with grief and betrayal. He'd lost his wife, but also discovered she had been hiding a secret affair. The couple's daughter was shielded from the details, but the impact on the family was immeasurable. The affair, once a whisper of scandal, was now the central narrative of a murder case. Prosecutors quickly labeled the killing a crime of passion. The evidence was overwhelming. Elena's body in David's apartment, surveillance footage of her arrival and his departure, phone records showing a heated exchange just before her death, a confession in which David admitted to losing control. For detectives, the motive was clear: obsession, jealousy, and rejection. But in court, nothing is ever simple. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered more troubling details. David's friends reported that he had become increasingly fixated on Elena in recent months. He spoke often of marriage, of taking her away, of starting fresh. When asked what he would do if she refused, one friend recalled him saying, "If she doesn't choose me, then what's the point of anything?" That chilling foreshadowing cast the crime in even darker light. Experts brought in to analyze the case described it as tragically predictable. Crimes of passion often occur when intense emotional bonds meet the fear of loss. Elena provided David with validation, with intimacy, with the illusion of stability. When she tried to pull away, his world collapsed. Unlike premeditated murders, crimes of passion are impulsive, explosive, and often leave behind mountains of evidence because they're not meticulously planned. This case was no exception. David had left fingerprints, surveillance footage, digital trails. His rage had consumed him, but his cover-up was non-existent. By late July, the case against David was airtight. The state of Florida prepared formal charges, second-degree murder. The trial date was set. Media outlets swarmed the courthouse. Elena's friends and family braced for the painful details to be aired publicly. And David, once a young man with dreams of a better life, now faced decades behind bars for a single night of rage. But as the trial began, both sides prepared to spin the story. Was David a monster consumed by jealousy, or a young man manipulated and discarded by a woman who never intended to leave her husband? The jury would decide.
The trial of State of Florida versus David Okoro began in May 2018, nearly a year after Elena Martinez's death. By then, the story had already captured headlines across Miami. What had once been whispered rumors about a married woman's affair with a younger immigrant was now the center of a sensational murder case. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse each morning, journalists jostling for position, cameras flashing as attorneys and family members walked past. Inside, the atmosphere was thick. Grief, betrayal, anger, and morbid curiosity filled the air. At the center sat David, wearing a plain suit borrowed from a public defender's office. He looked smaller, quieter, a shell of the man he had once been. Across the aisle sat Carlos Martinez, his face hollow with grief, flanked by friends and relatives. Every day, he carried the weight of two unbearable truths. His wife was gone, and she had been unfaithful. The prosecution wasted no time setting the tone. Prosecutor Linda Herrera, opening statement. This is not a case about premeditation. It is not about cold calculation. This is about passion, about obsession, about a man who could not accept rejection, and in a moment of rage, took the life of a woman who trusted him. Elena Martinez didn't die at random. She died because she said no. The words landed heavily in the courtroom. The defense countered with a different framing. Defense attorney Mark Ellis. This was a tragic accident, not murder. David was young, naive, and deeply in love with the woman who used him as an escape from her unhappy marriage. He never intended to harm her. He lost control in the heat of an argument she provoked by playing with his emotions, giving him hope, then yanking it away. This is not murder. This is human tragedy. Two narratives were now set: the prosecution's tale of obsession turned deadly versus the defense's claim of a manipulated young man caught in passion's snare. The state's strategy was clear: build a timeline, anchor it in evidence, and show that David's actions were not just accidental, but inevitable. They began with phone records. Jurors were shown text exchanges between David and Elena in the days leading up to her death. Some were playful, but others revealed growing tension. Prosecutor reading aloud. David, when are you leaving him? Elena, I can't stop asking. David, then what are we doing? I'm not your toy. The courtroom murmured. The texts revealed not just love, but volatility. Next came the surveillance footage. Grainy clips projected onto the courtroom screen showed Elena arriving at David's apartment at 10:33 p.m. and David leaving at 11:42 p.m., his pace hurried, his body tense. Prosecutor Herrera, ladies and gentlemen, she went in alive, and less than an hour later, he left. She never came out. The medical examiner then took the stand. He described Elena's injuries in clinical but chilling detail. A fractured skull, internal bleeding, consistent with blunt force trauma. Medical examiner, these injuries are not consistent with a simple fall. They indicate force, repeated force. The jury shifted uneasily. Finally, the prosecution called Detective Rosa Delgado to walk through the interrogation. Clips were played of David denying involvement, then later admitting, I loved her. I didn't mean for this to happen. We fought. I lost control. Herrera leaned into this. Herrera to the jury, he admits it. He admits he lost control. That loss of control cost Elena Martinez her life. When it was their turn, the defense painted a different picture. They emphasized the context: a young immigrant,
isolated, manipulated by an older woman with wealth and status. They argued Elena never intended to leave her husband, yet strung David along, feeding him promises she never meant to keep. To David, they claimed, Elena was not just a lover, but his lifeline in a city where he felt invisible. The defense called David himself to the stand, a risky move, but one they hoped would humanize him. David, tearfully, "I loved Elena. She made me feel like I mattered, but she lied to me. She told me she loved me, then said she could never leave her husband. That night, we fought. I didn't mean to hurt her. I couldn't handle her walking away again. It happened so fast, and then she was on the floor. I swear, I never wanted this." Some jurors looked sympathetic, others unmoved. The defense also called a psychologist who testified that crimes of passion are often spontaneous, triggered by rejection and fueled by emotional dysregulation. Psychologist: "These acts are rarely planned. They are explosive. Mr. Okoro's background, his age, his circumstances, all align with someone vulnerable to this kind of emotional overload." The defense's plea was clear. David was guilty of poor judgment, guilty of losing control, but not guilty of intentional murder. He is not a monster. He is a man who made a mistake in the heat of passion. The most powerful moment of the trial came when Carlos Martinez took the stand. His voice cracked as he described the moment police told him his wife was dead. Carlos, emotional: "I thought she was at a friend's house. I thought she'd come home. I never imagined she was living another life. And now she's gone. And my daughter asks me every night why her mother isn't coming back." The courtroom fell silent. Even David looked down, unable to meet Carlos's eyes. The prosecution hammered home its theme. Herrera. He may not have planned it, but he chose rage. He chose violence, and Elena Martinez paid with her life. That, ladies and gentlemen, is murder. The defense made its final appeal. Ellis: "Do not confuse tragedy with intent. David is guilty of poor judgment, of losing control, but not of murder. He is not a monster. He is a man who made a mistake in the heat of passion." The jury deliberated for nearly 2 days. Outside, reporters speculated endlessly. Would David be convicted of second-degree murder, or would the jury see his crime as manslaughter born of emotion? On the third day, the jury returned. The courtroom held its breath as the foreperson stood. Judge: "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Foreperson: "Yes, Your Honor. We, the jury, find the defendant, David Okoro, guilty of second-degree murder." Gasps rippled through the room. Carlos closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. David sat motionless, staring ahead, his life forever altered in a single sentence. The judge sentenced him to 30 years in state prison. Judge: "This court recognizes the tragedy of this case, but it also recognizes the loss of life caused by your actions, Mr. Okoro. Elena Martinez is gone, and no sentence can bring her back." As David was led away in handcuffs, the Martinez family held each other. For them, the verdict brought justice, but no closure. Elena was still gone. Their lives were still broken. For David, it was the end of a dream. A young man who came to America chasing opportunity, now condemned to spend most of his life behind bars. And for the city of Miami, it was a chilling reminder that beneath the glitter and glamour, love could still turn deadly. But even after the verdict, one question remained. Why? Why do affairs, fueled by desire and secrecy, so often spiral into violence? To answer that, we turn to the psychology of passion and obsession.
The verdict was clear: 30 years in prison. Justice, at least legally, had been served. But long after the courtroom emptied, the deeper questions lingered. Why did this happen? Why did a romance that began with smiles and champagne end in blood and prison bars? And most haunting of all, could it have been prevented? To answer these questions, psychologists and criminologists often turn to the concept of crimes of passion, emotional eruptions where reason collapses and instinct takes over. Elena Martinez's case fit the pattern almost too perfectly. Unlike premeditated crimes, passion killings are rarely planned. They do not begin with blueprints, alibis, or elaborate cover-ups. Instead, they ignite suddenly, fueled by jealousy, rejection, and obsession. Psychologists describe them as affective homicides, killings triggered by overwhelming emotional states. The trigger is often rejection, the feeling of being abandoned, humiliated, or betrayed. In David's case, the trigger was Elena's refusal to leave her husband. For months, he had clung to the fantasy of a life together. That fantasy became his anchor in a city where he felt invisible. When Elena shattered that illusion, his world collapsed. It wasn't about planning. It was about eruption. Experts analyzing David's background pointed to something deeper: attachment styles. Elena, at 38, fit the profile of what psychologists call an avoidant partner. She craved closeness, but pulled back when the stakes became too high. To her, David was an escape. Passionate, intoxicating, but never truly a future. David, by contrast, embodied the anxious style. He was deeply invested, fearful of abandonment, and desperate for reassurance. He placed Elena at the center of his emotional universe. When avoidant meets anxious, the result can be a cycle of instability. The avoidant partner withdraws, the anxious partner clings harder. The more Elena hesitated, the more David demanded. The more David demanded, the more Elena pulled away. It's a pattern therapists call the pursuer-distancer dynamic, and left unchecked, it can escalate into exactly what we saw in Miami Beach: obsession, conflict, and in this case, tragedy. Jealousy is one of the most powerful emotional triggers in human behavior. Studies show that jealousy activates the same neural circuits as fear and anger, priming the brain for impulsive, sometimes violent reactions. For David, jealousy wasn't just about Elena's husband, it was about her world, her wealth, her stability, her refusal to choose him. Every time she returned to Carlos, David felt not just rejected, but erased. Criminologist Dr. Laura Kim, expert commentary, in passion crimes, jealousy often operates as a distortion. The person convinces themselves that their partner is the only thing that gives life meaning. When that partner pulls away, the reaction can be catastrophic. One of the hardest truths of this case is distinguishing between love and obsession. On the surface, they can look similar: intensity, passion, devotion, but underneath, they are very different. Love allows space. Obsession consumes. Love accepts reality. Obsession demands fantasy. David was not in love with Elena as she truly was. He was in love with the version of her he had created in his mind, a woman who would leave her marriage, build a life with him, and make his sacrifices worthwhile. When Elena revealed she couldn't be that woman, the illusion shattered. Psychologists call this erotic fixation, when desire is fused with dependency, creating a dangerous inability to let go. It is one of the most common threads in crimes of passion. The imbalance of power between Elena and David also played a role. Elena was older, financially secure, socially established. David was younger, financially struggling, and still carving out his identity. At first, that imbalance made the affair exciting. For Elena, it was a taste of youth. For David, it was validation. But over time, those differences became points of conflict. Elena could walk away and still have her family, her reputation, her comfort. David had invested everything. That asymmetry magnified David's desperation. When Elena hesitated, it wasn't just rejection. It was the loss of everything he believed he had built. This is the haunting question families, friends, and investigators always ask. Could someone have seen the warning signs? Could someone have intervened? In hindsight, the red flags were clear. Friends recalled Elena describing David as too intense. Co-workers noticed David's mood swings and possessiveness. Texts revealed ultimatums, jealousy, and escalating demands. But passion crimes rarely come with flashing alarms. They build quietly, in whispers and private messages, until one night they explode. For Carlos, the tragedy was twofold. He not only lost his wife, but also discovered she had been living a double life. The betrayal deepened the grief. For Elena's daughter, the loss was irreparable. a childhood forever marked by absence. For David's family in Nigeria, the shock was just as devastating. A son who had left with dreams of opportunity now faced decades in an American prison. His mother later told reporters, "He was a good boy. He wanted to make us proud. I don't understand how this happened." That's the cruel reality of crimes of passion. They don't just claim one victim. They ripple outward, destroying families, friendships, and futures. So what can we learn from Elena's story? Secrecy breeds danger. Affairs, by nature, thrive in shadows, and in shadows, emotions can distort into obsession. Passion without boundaries is combustible. Desire alone is not dangerous, but when paired with jealousy and dependency, it can ignite. The human heart is unpredictable. Even the most ordinary people, when consumed by rejection or rage, can commit extraordinary acts of violence. Elena's case is not isolated. Across the United States, passion killings make up a significant portion of domestic homicides. Studies show that nearly 30% of female homicide victims are killed by intimate partners, often in moments of emotional eruption. The settings vary: suburban homes, hotels, city apartments, but the pattern is chillingly consistent. Love curdles into obsession, rejection triggers rage, and within minutes, lives are destroyed. In the end, Elena's affair was not just a secret romance. It was a slow-burning fuse, one that led to a single violent eruption. For David, passion became obsession. For Elena, escape became entrapment. And for Carlos and their daughter, love turned into loss. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, that desire can be as dangerous as it is intoxicating, and that obsession, unchecked, can destroy not just two lives, but entire families. And so the story of Elena Martinez does not end in a courtroom. It lingers as a warning, as a lesson, and as a reminder of how fragile the line is between love and destruction.
Elena Martinez thought she could live two lives, the devoted wife and mother, and the secret lover chasing passion in Miami Beach. David Okoro believed she was his future, the answer to his loneliness, his anchor in a new country. But when illusion collided with reality, passion turned into obsession, and obsession into tragedy. One woman lost her life, one man lost his freedom. Two families, worlds apart, left shattered in the wake of a love affair gone wrong. That is the dark truth of crimes of passion. They rarely begin with malice, but they almost always end in ruin. Behind the glittering lights of Miami's paradise, this story reminds us that desire can be intoxicating, but also deadly. This is what we uncover here at Dark Passion. True stories where love, lust, and obsession blur into violence. Stories that reveal just how thin the line is between devotion and destruction. So if this case left you haunted, if it made you see how dangerous passion can become, then don't walk away now. Subscribe to Dark Passion for more chilling tales where romance turns fatal. Hit the bell icon so you never miss when we unveil the next story. And share this video so others can witness how quickly love can spiral into tragedy. This was Deadly Secret Affair in Miami Beach. This is Dark Passion, where love burns brightest and sometimes burns everything to the ground.